5 years ago, 5 people sat around this dining table, making plans and drinking many cups of bad coffee made by me. And that was how the Galle Literary Festival began. If you're really interested to know what goes on at an annual event like this, join me on Ashok Goes to Galle, and I will take you through the ups and downs, the highs and lows, the ins and outs of what is only recently described as the world's #1 literary festival. People always ask me, why do we have to have this festival in Galle? Why not Colombo, or Kandy, or Jaffna? Well, there are 3 reasons really. The first and most important one is that Galle is a small town. And because it's small, the festival pretty much occupies your entire space. If you had it in a bigger town, people would be rushing off to other things, having other appointments. Here, you are a captive audience, and that is the thing about Galle. Secondly, it's a walled Renaissance town. It's pretty much like those walled towns you find in Italy or Spain or Portugal. And the important word here is wall because you are enclosed. And you're enclosed with a couple of thousand strangers who are also like-minded people, just like yourself. They're just as eccentric, just as mad, and also interested in literature. So by the end of the festival, you are quite friendly with these 2,000-odd strangers. The final, the third, and probably for me the most important reason why Galle wins out is it is by the sea. And you can't forget that. Just outside the Hall de Galle, the fishermen are catching their fish. The sea is glinting and sparkling. There's a special quality of light about Galle. Even if you don't see the sea, even if you don't swim in it, there is a kind of a holiday atmosphere. And that's really important because one of the main things about literature, as far as I'm concerned, is that it's got to be a fun, enjoyable experience. We're not sitting in some dusty university room with a lot of boring old lecturers falling asleep in the audience.
Clutching his back and screaming.
Here, you got fun people, you got writers who are making you laugh and making you enjoy the stuff that you're reading. So, having the seaside there gives the whole thing a holiday atmosphere and encourages young people to pick up books because literature, as far as I'm concerned, ought to be a fun thing. The festival is now 5 years old. What was it actually like in those early years? We're particularly fortunate to have somebody who has just flown in from Islamabad to be here with us, but she's no stranger to this country. She was, in fact, our very first festival manager. Her name is Libby Southwell. She's also an author, a book called Monsoon Rains and Icicle Drops. Libby Southwell, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Ashok. It's great to be back in the 5th year of this fantastic festival. Really, really great.
And of course, one of the few years where you actually are a festival goer as opposed to behind the scenes.
Yeah, too right. It's brilliant being a punter as opposed to an organiser. Quite stressful being an organiser, but it's fantastic to come back here as a punter, knowing that actually we set the foundations for something that's just been so brilliant.
And can you see how it's grown, how it's really grown from those early years?
Yeah, it gives me such joy to see how many people look forward to it every year as an annual event now, and also the impact it has on the community. All the community are involved with the shops around Galle Fort. It's just absolutely fantastic, engaging with the schools in the area, the essay writing competitions. It's really growing from strength to strength, and also fantastic to give such a good platform to Sri Lankan writers.
Libby, you were involved right from the start. Would you like to tell us a little bit about those early days?
Well, in a sense, it was Jeffrey Dobbs, one of his ideas, and we decided to get 5 of our friends together, all who were passionate about literature, from writers, publishers, bookshop owners. We sat around a table And we came up with this fantastic idea of having the festival and involving both international and local writers in it and promoting English as a use as a linked language. So fun days at the beginning, cups of coffee around a table, trying to get this up and running in such a short space of time, 3 months. But with hard work, we all just managed and we pulled it together, and it's, fantastic to see what it is today.
Of course, nobody then had any idea how big this festival would grow. This year, it is bigger and better than ever.
Today is a full house today.
Really, I haven't
it's
been in
packed
there.
today,
Yeah.
but yeah.
Yeah. I dread to think what it'll be like tomorrow if today this morning
But
is.
today is the last session on the BBC, so I guess
okay,
people just
so-
wanted to get a
Yes.
final shot,
Yeah.
experiencing all that they have to offer.
And actually, that was quite a feisty session yesterday, wasn't it?
I was very pleased, actually.
Yeah.
That's what this whole thing is about.
Yeah.
And it sort of underlines or underscores that the festival does offer freedom of expression to any component of society, of all of the factions represented within the demographic.
And really, really hats off to you for arranging things like this.
Oh, no.
We
My
could do with
pleasure.
more of this, I'm
Yes,
sure,
yes,
this kind
yes.
of public airing of one's.
I agree, and I think it's one of the few vehicles in the country that does that. So we're just happy to be there and be a part of that and facilitate that,
Yeah.
that people in Sri Lanka can have a voice. Everyone in Sri Lanka can have a voice.
For this first episode of Ashok Goes to Galle, I bring you the German author Ilya Troyanov. He's brought to us courtesy of the Goethe Institute in Colombo, and he will talk about two of his books, Mumbai to Mecca and Along the Ganges. Now, these are much more than just travel books. It would be fair to call them an account of the journeys one man has made in his quest for knowledge and enlightenment. I caught up with Ilya on the terraces of magical Klosenberg Hotel in Galle.
These books are quite curious because they're a mix of mysticism, mythology, and also darn good tales of pure ordinary folk that you meet along your travels. Tell me this, in another life, do you think you might have been a holy man? And I don't mean that to be funny either.
Well, Ashok, the first question that you ask your guest is one to kind of loosen the mood and to make life easy for the guest. You've decided to start with a question which makes life hard for me. Anyway, good evening. Thank you for coming. I think it would be nice actually to talk about what holiness is. Because one of the things I reflect upon is that the concept of the holy has been hijacked basically by fundamentalists, and that they decide what is spiritual, they decide what is holy. Now, from my point of view, there's absolutely no justification for that, because I truly believe that every human being has a different path towards the largest questions of his existence, and that defining the spiritual path of other human beings is actually in opposition to the pure concept of spirituality itself. Because we're not talking about a structure of law, we're not talking about something which can be defined for another human being. We're talking about something which is very intimate. And I do think that you would not find two people who share the same concept of God. I think every person has a different, slightly different, maybe minutely different, but different idea of what God is, what life is, what his place on earth is. So if one accepts that, diversity is probably the name of the game in religious affairs. And it seems to me when I look at nature that diversity is also the holy principle. And if you would accept that as well, you would have to say that religious diversity is the only proof we have of God's existence. Because if God didn't want to have diversity, I'm sure he would have found ways to avoid it. So I've always been very troubled by any group of people, defining the realms of the holy for their particular crowd of believers or even for the whole of humanity. So in my writings, I try to kind of broaden, the concepts of what is spiritual and holy.
Yeah. Talking of diversity, this book, Along the Ganges, it's about as diverse and as broad as you can get because it is basically India. What you've done here is it's a very clever. You're journeying along the Ganges, plus you're doing various kind of you're following it to its source sort of thing, and in that journey you manage to capture a huge number of different events, people, festivals, etc. How difficult was it to capture India in what is essentially quite a small, supposedly a guidebook, but in fact it's not a guidebook. It's actually a spiritual journey as much as anything else.
Not even supposedly, but
Not even supposedly.
I think the only way you can talk about India is to accept the limitations of how you're representing India, because basically the old colonial texts suffered from the arrogance of assuming they could actually capture India. So from a modern perspective, I think one has to admit immediately that one is just drawing a few gentle lines, one is just showing a few small aspects of something which is as broad, large, and diverse as you could possibly imagine. That would be the first thing. The second thing is that any book written about a journey along the Ganges stands in a very, very ancient tradition, and that is the Ganga Kayatra tradition. So a tradition which goes back probably about 3,000 years of people doing the pilgrimage, either from the mouth to the source or from the source to the mouth. And there are very many different ways to do this pilgrimage. So it's interesting because my Hajj is also in a tradition of many so-called safarnama or rihlas, many depictions, many travelogues of hundreds of generations before me. So it's interesting actually to be part of a literary tradition and to try and mix it up with one's own kind of
and thereby sort of own it, make it slightly different, make it your point of view sort of thing.
Exactly, but being aware of the tradition. And the interesting thing is that because part of the journey was done on foot, part of it was done on a small inflatable boat, part of it was done in these unbelievably overcrowded buses in Bihar, and so on and so forth. And whenever I met local people, they would ask me, what are you doing? And if I said I was walking, for example, from Allahabad to Varanasi, they would just shake their heads and they would think, this damn Gora, this typical Firangi, doesn't know what he's doing. If I told them I'm on a Ganga Kayatra, they wouldn't ask any further question. Everything was settled with that answer. Yeah. So kind of taking on the cloak of a particular pilgrimage gives you the possibility of entering spaces which were previously alien to you.
You talk about the Kumbh Mela. I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it correctly, but it's enormously fascinating. Would you like to tell us a bit about that?
Well, the Kumbh Mela is, if you're afraid of crowds, don't go there, because it's the biggest assembly of human beings on earth. No one knows how many, because no one has the time to count them, but guesses range from 30 to 40 million. And one of the most bizarre conversations of my life was I was standing on a hillock with a few Indian journalists early morning of the holiest bathing day, when everybody goes for the snan, for the holy bath into the Ganga. And one of the journalists said, so how many people do you think there are? And the colleague said, well, I guess about 10 million. And the other guy said, no, it must be about 20 million. And I thought it's wonderful. When you reach a certain kind of size, the difference between 10 and 20 million becomes very minor. But what happens at the Kumbh Mela is people from all over India come. It's every 12 years, and then 12 times 12, so every 140 years. It's a particularly auspicious event, and that was when I went there. And the other thing I have to explain is that I didn't go there as a tourist. I actually managed to organize a place in one of the sadhu camps. And I thought that was very clever, because I could describe the event from inside, from the perspective of the sadhus. What I didn't realize is that these guys have a stamina which is unbelievable. First of all, they don't sleep. They smoke or drink an enormous amount of bhang, what's bhang in English?
I don't know. Any offers?
Ganja. Okay. And they're continuously in ecstasy. Now, for a normal modern person, ecstasy is something which you do between 7 and 8. But to be 3 weeks in ecstasy is very, very tiring.
Apart from the various sadhus you meet, I love your kind of descriptions of the various characters. For instance, there's a bit about call centers and US American Hindus. You call them athletes of spirituality.
Olympians, yeah. No, because they had an incredible program, I couldn't believe it. From 6 in the morning to 11 in the evening, they had a non-stop spirituality exercise regime. And it was like...
Is that possible?
I don't know how they do it, but you see, the problem is they only have 1 week to reach paradise or nirvana or oblivion. So those are people in a hurry. I mean, they have to get back to work. So it was, and the funny thing is there's a very, very beautiful old Indian tale or story, and it says that a student comes to the guru, a shishya comes to the guru and asks him, well, how long is it going to take for me to reach nirvana? And the guru says, well, all your life. And the student says, okay, but if I really put up my best effort, I really work hard. And the guru then says, well, probably going to take 2 lives or 3 lives. And then the student says, well, if I do nothing else, if that's all I focus on, then the guru looks at him and shakes his head sadly and says, you're never going to get there. So I'm afraid Americans are not going to get into nirvana.
I hope there are no Americans here.
Well, then you're the exception, yeah. Exception to the rule.